Welcome back to the Pulse Check Podcast, home of the hottest takes and the freshest perspective. We're so excited to have you here for another episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Hey guys.
Oh, like from last episode?
Yeah, it was like right here.
We were like dancing at the beginning of last episode.
All right, we're starting. We're done with that. Awesome. So this is kind of a neat point in our podcast history. We have the first guest on here today.
I'm honored.
Dr. Deibel, saxophone professor here at Florida State University. This guy knows him really well, and I've kind of gotten to know him a little bit, doing some projects with him, doing some projects with AJ and some of the other grads. So we're really happy to have you on.
Honored to be here.
Have a good conversation, and let's get started.
Yeah. Dr. Deibel, you have any initial thoughts? What do you think about the pod? You enjoyed it so far?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, you know, the highlights that you all posted piqued my interest. I mean, first of all, I just enjoy listening to y'all speak into a microphone. You're going to have to deal with this less attractive voice today. But, no, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you guys are covering some great topics that really are important things for any musician to think about, certainly any student to think about. So I've loved it, yeah.
We're excited to toss some difficult questions your way. And if you know Dr. Deibel, he can maneuver through anything.
Oh, jeez. Set me up for failure here. No.
Let's talk a little bit about your sort of entry into academia. What was your experience like, Dr. Deibel, and is there anything that sticks out? What were the initial challenges that you experienced with that?
You know, I started like any student does, just going to school. I was lucky enough to get myself into a really, really good school. And I didn't take it for granted. I think that was probably something that served me really well. You know, I didn't expect to be in the position that I was in. And I really remember walking around campus once I was there and just thinking like, wow, I can't believe this happened. Like, it was like a real gift, you know what I mean? So I really took everything seriously. And then, you know, in terms of like getting into like teaching, if that's more what you're talking about, you know, I didn't really quite know what I wanted to do with my life, to be perfectly honest. Even like up through my, you know, maybe into my master's, I would say. I think once I completed my master's, I kind of was more resolved. Okay, this is going to be what I at least try to do with my life. But I was cleaning out my room at my mom's house a couple of years ago, and I found a bunch of essays that I had written, even like into late college, talking about how unsure I was about what I wanted to do. No one really kind of gets what I do. You know, I felt like very on the outside of most other students' experiences as a performance major in music. Even though I enjoyed what I was doing, I think from influence from my father for sure, like I was trying to develop another skill set that might be something that I would do later on. So I did a Bachelor of Arts in History. And so I had gone, after undergraduate, I had gone to do an internship at a think tank in DC called the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And it took just that 6 months internship to be like, yep, I want to go back and do music. Like the people were not as interesting. It wasn't what I felt like a real calling to do, despite the fact that I still struggle a little bit with feeling like academia is very insular, which I still think it is in many cases. And then, you know, I finished my master's, and then my thought at the time was, okay, well, I'll try to see if I can work, see if I can apply for some jobs and see how it goes. And of course, not much happened, but I did get a couple of important opportunities, one of which was playing with New World Symphony. And I went down there and I met another saxophonist named Brian Sakawa, who I think has just finished his time in the Army Field Band. And Brian was a great saxophonist and a really interesting guy to meet at that time for me, because I went down there, and when you go down there, you don't have much to do aside from, you know, do your one rehearsal for like maybe an hour or something, and then you have the whole rest of the day free. So, you know, we would go out, and I got to know him, and he was trying to make the new music thing happen at the time. He was in Baltimore, and I think had left the band. I'm not sure. He was out of the band for a little while and then went back in. and he was trying to do this new music thing and try to make a scene happen and all this stuff and really putting a lot of effort into it. And he, just kind of clued me into the fact that, once you get out of school, it's all you, and no one else is really going to help you. You got to do your own thing. You got to create your own opportunities. And so for whatever reason, that just kind of like lit a fire under me. I went back home to Chicago, and I did exactly what he described. I started getting on the computer like once every day, sending out cold call emails, just reaching out to people. I reached out to Claire Chase at the time. I was like, hey, do you need a saxophonist? And they already had one, who I know very well now. But, I did create some opportunities for myself through doing that. And then after a couple of years of just kind of, living in Chicago, doing some teaching and then getting some opportunities from these actions that I was taking, I realized, okay, I need to go to get my doctorate. Otherwise, I'm not going to be competitive for these jobs. I need to have that, that degree. So I went up to Michigan State. And then the vehicle, I guess, that carried me forward from there was H2 Quartet, of course. And so we started just being, very active. We had some competition success early on. And I took a little longer. I took 4 years to finish my degree because of how busy H2 was at the time. And then, I was very lucky just to have one of my colleagues in H2 was teaching at Grand Valley State University, got a job there. And he had a director who was very strict and wanted them to only teach up to their load and no more than that, which is a rarity. But because of that, I was hired to teach some overflow students in a couple classes there, and I also taught at a small school up in Alma, Michigan, which is this really small town, but they have Alma College there. So it was my first two kind of teaching jobs. Then at the end of that year, which was 2010, I got a call from a former teacher of mine, Jonathan Helton, who's the professor at University of Florida. And Jonathan had been the teacher, second teacher aside from Dr. Hemke at Northwestern. And he said, hey, I'm taking a sabbatical next year. Would you like to, come and teach for me for the year? And of course I had to say yes, because, you don't get that opportunity to teach a real studio full-time, at a big school like that. So. Yeah. I was excited about it, and it just kind of happened really quickly. And then the next year I was, again, without kind of something lined up. I was, H2 had taken a long European tour that summer. So we were going around, and then Bobby Young, who has been teaching at UNCSA, is about to start at Greensboro, I believe, moving to Greensboro. Bobby Young, I think, gave me a call and said, hey, I'm at Wichita State, but I'm leaving, and they're looking to do an emergency hire. And I think you should apply. So I applied. I did my interview for that in the basement of a hotel in Belgrade, Serbia. Wow. And I was fortunate enough to be hired for that interim position. Mm-hmm. And, from what my colleagues in the quartet and other, teachers have been telling me, they're like, you go after this 110%, like make it your own, make yourself indispensable, give everything that you can. And in that first year, they decided to convert the position back into full-time, and they hired me for the full-time position. I was already kind of getting some other interview calls at the time, and so they didn't, I guess I was successful in doing that, and they managed to hire me on, and then this FSU thing happened, 6 years later, and dream job. So
How did you know that teaching was it for you?
I would say because I just really like working with people. Because, I think that's one thing that you wouldn't know it by looking around a lot of times right now, but most people just crave human connection. They want to connect with other people. Because you gain more understanding of yourself and the world around you by doing that. And teaching is the one way that I know that is just something that gives that to you every single time. Yeah.
Did you ever think about some things that you wanted to know before you, I guess at the latter half of your doctorate, but when you started like getting into what we call like the limbo zone of like not knowing what's next? Like now that you have all this experience and like a beautiful career, what would you have told yourself at that time?
Something that I would have done differently?
It could be, or just
information you wish you knew that would change, or
I actually, so full disclosure to anyone listening, I did get these questions in advance. So I had like just, 12 hours to sort of think about them. And so my answer would be just that to know that no one has it all figured out. Mm-hmm. And there's that old saying, life is what happens while you're making other plans, that kind of thing. But, I think I had this vision of when I was a student that, okay, I get my doctorate and I'm good to go, right? I'm now the finished article, right? But that's not how it works, as you guys know, right? You continue to, grow and progress throughout, hopefully, throughout the course of your career and your life. If you're not, then probably not going to be as exciting otherwise,
That's true, yeah.
But I think I wish I would have known that, but at the same time, not fully realizing that, probably kept that fire lit under me a little bit, to try to keep myself going. I'm not sure I could have rid myself of that anyways, but, I think to know that is certainly comforting, I think, when you're in your guys' position, like kind of just starting out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, one thing that I caught on to when you were kind of talking about your journey is there were certain times in your different stops where somebody called you or recommended you or like you were talking about with the case of UF, wanted you to come in and teach. What, and this may be a performing thing or a personality thing, what do you think makes you, even now, makes you stand out that may be a little bit different than other people that may be colleagues or peers? What makes you stand out?
I'm not really sure if there's anything that makes me stand out. I mean, hopefully it's my personality. At the time, I was really trying to develop, something I heard Matt talking about on, I think, the second episode, which is just like finding your voice, as a performer. I got like really hardcore into contemporary music, like kind of sort of towards the end of my master's and then in the interim between my master's and my doctorate. And so like, then I was like, all right, this is the kind of music I want to play because I just think it's super cool. It took me a while to kind of figure out, within all of that, what was actually worth playing, what were the pieces that, did represent me, and you have to kind of, filter through that stuff over time. I think, I've told Matt this in lessons before, but some of the stuff that I was excited about back then, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole now. Like it doesn't have anything to say to me at the moment. So, I think, I guess what maybe made me stand out back then was that I was a little bit more in the front foot in terms of like developing a presence of, I made my own website. I tried to create all these opportunities for myself, and that's, I think, more the standard nowadays. Like people are more typically going to have a website. That doesn't necessarily make you special, but, then when they go to the website, what's the story you're going to tell, I guess, about yourself? For myself, I've just tried to, for a long time, I was just trying to be that person that could play all the crazy stuff, and stuff that was interesting, I think, to as many people as possible. But I think also I've, thrived on versatility too. Like I feel that I can play anything that I want to for the most part, and usually, execute the way that I want to. And I do think that's a reflection of myself. I love all kinds of music, like probably. Yeah, more than many of my students realize. I don't know.
I guess this is kind of like a dual-sided question because I know you as my teacher, so I'm like really familiar with. I mean, we've talked about most of these things like all the time, and so I think one good thing to do would be for the listener is to like maybe contextualize some more of your stances about teaching and like how you stood out, or if that was even something that you were thinking about. At that time when you were exiting your doctorate, like entering the field as an early professional, because I think today we think about how can we make ourselves competitive for these jobs and stand out, like was that something that you were thinking about at the time? And like, I guess like, you said as you started to get more into the teaching thing, you went to UF and then, Wichita, you started to get more traction and more people like looking to you for that sort of job. So it's at least to me, like I feel like a lot of that attraction would be from your performance, but also like where you sit as a pedagogue and a teacher. Well,
I mean, I was certainly like influenced by my teachers, no doubt about it, and I'm I just feel so lucky to have had the teachers that I've had over my life. And they all gave something different to me, I think. And it's interesting because I go back, honestly, I tend to reference my high school teacher almost more than anybody else. They all did different things for me, I would say. But in terms of, like, I guess my musical profile and my artistic profile, I really kind of developed that by getting into contemporary music, starting to become friends with a lot of composers, and that was kind of what was happening in that interim period between master's and undergrad. I was living in Chicago, had a little bit of interfacing with a couple of the composers that were finishing their doctorates at Northwestern at the time, and then we just started hanging out, and then they just started turning me on to all this music that I knew nothing about, and I already knew that it was important to know music that was outside of your, instruments universe, right? In my undergraduate, even just like in music theory, I remember we listened to Mahler. I went out and bought like the box set of Chicago Symphony playing Mahler because I was so obsessed with it. We listened to Gesualdo, motets, and I was obsessed. I became obsessed with Gesualdo, and I would just buy like all the Gesualdo that I could find, so I just got obsessed with like Renaissance vocal music. And then, the contemporary music thing just became the next step towards that. And then I was reading about a lot of these composers and what they had to say and the connections that they made towards, what they were doing at the time, or between what they were doing at the time and much of that early music that I was really interested in. And so I just felt like, hey, I've got this unique perspective because as saxophonists, we all play new music, but I've got maybe a unique perspective because I've got this window into, what does music look like from, outside of the saxophone world, and you can see a lot of things that are missing, that just we have no idea about, and then later on, I'd played Alex Minchek's piece Karate, for the first time. This is like years ago. And I was like, wow, this piece is really cool. No saxophonists, yet no saxophonists are playing his music, So I went and I decided I was going to interview Alex just to kind of find out what was the background and maybe I would just go and present some of his music, at a NASA, it was Navy Band Symposium, I think, at the time. And come to find out that, Alex was a jazz saxophonist, studied with I think Bunky Green at North Florida, and then went up to Manhattan, studied with Dick Oates at Manhattan, and was just someone that had a foot both in the composition world and, jazz world. He turned me on to all these free jazz players that I had know nothing about, like Roscoe Mitchell, Evan Parker, and I started to listen to some of their music, and I was like, oh, wow, these guys are doing the same thing that I do when I play a contemporary piece that's, composed. But most classical saxophonists have no idea who those guys are. And,
thinking about that, I think for you, all of this happened like so much more, dare I say, like more genuinely than I feel like some classical saxophonists, but I think people in general these days, because of maybe just I'm not sure what it was like back then because I was like, probably still, obviously really young, so I wasn't thinking about that. But we're in sort of like a more starvation, we have to do everything to the job. Whereas like, I think just by being yourself, you made yourself competitive because you had so much unique interest that far surpassed your instrument. Yeah,
I mean, I should have added to that. I'm not sure if I answered your question, honestly, but I think, so like what I was going to say I should have added before was that there was a recognition I certainly had that, okay, to make a name for myself, I'm going to have to connect with composers that are well-known. I then realized a lot of these composers that are well-known, especially in the contemporary music world, have not written for saxophone, or if they have, maybe saxophonists don't know about them. Because some of them might be from Europe and are just lesser known over here, which was the case for a long time. So there was definitely a recognition on my part at that time that, okay, I need to try and get performances and maybe some premieres of some big name composers as much as I can so that I can start to list out, this is what I've done, because that will, somehow elevate me, Sure. But it was all stuff that I was certainly genuinely interested in at the time. as I said, I would then grow in terms of what I thought was worth playing and what was not worth playing, and maybe change my perspective a little bit in terms of that. But that was a big part of it,
Yeah.
So, but I think a lot of that had also been influenced by the fact that I was into a lot of underground music, like going way back to like middle school and high school, and just that kind of eclectic, view of music. I think, one of my earliest musical memories is listening to the Abbey Road album all the way through. I could just remember sitting next to the speaker and just like listening to the whole thing from start to finish and being like, oh yeah, that's normal to have like all those different kinds of songs that are completely different from one to the next. So I think just that in and of itself was a big influence on my openness to consider, hey, just go and do what you like.
Yeah.
Whatever moves you,
That's refreshing. To me, that's refreshing to hear, because I have this conversation with Dr. Parks all the time. Sometimes I get so stuck in doing what I have to do as far as in my educational journey now, which is a lot of solo percussion playing, percussion ensemble, and then large ensembles. And then it was refreshing to hear you talk about outside influence, not just variety within the what's considered classical, but also like listening to, popular music and how that affects your playing and your personality. And we talk about that all the time, but all the best professors that I've had have had a similar story. Just like I'm not only listening to and playing, repertoire for my instrument. You're grabbing influence from everything you listen to without realizing it.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes with realizing it, being an informed listener, and if you're playing something that's jazz influenced, then listening to that or already having that in you, I think that's refreshing to hear.
Oh yeah. I mean, I heard you talking about like I don't listen to this or that when I'm leaving the school.
Not at all.
But neither do I. I mean, I tell my students all the time, like, listen to maybe a little bit of classical saxophone, for those younger kids. I certainly was at that age, but really make sure you don't only listen to. That's more important, because there's so much more out there, and I think you're going to get more of a richness of tonal concept if you're listening to singers and string players and other winds and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think it's interesting because I remember when I was a master's student, I went to Southern Miss, and like at the time, Southern Miss was just turning over from like the heavy German school into like a more like
open,
you can play whatever you want, basically. And I had asked the question, like, what is the difference of calling someone a French school of thought person versus German? And like, I never got a clear, concise answer, and I hate that. That conversation always annoys me. But I remember looking far into it and finding like
you did a presentation on it.
I did, yeah. And I was just so obsessed with it. But like, I figured out that Marcel Mule's inspiration for his sound was based on the female soprano voice, violin, and his experience playing in dance bands and things like that. And now, like, how that's tracked over to 2025 is, we take bits of this, bits of that without even realizing it. And I don't know. I wonder sometimes if we've lost a little bit of that creativity.
Well, I think, with the advent of recording, I mean, that's obviously a long time ago, but it's more so been with, the internet, and YouTube taking over as much as they have. You used to have to go and like dig up records.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that anymore. You can just like everything's, right in front of you, like literally. I think there's just so much out there, and I feel like even I will get stuck into, kind of listening to the same old thing. Oh, not necessarily listening to the same old thing over and over again, but I feel so refreshed when I find something new. And I feel like if there's a drug out there, that's what I need, like all the time. Like the more I can get something new, and especially something that I don't quite get at the first listen, but like piques my interest, like I'm always into that. Like that's what keeps me like motivated,
I agree. Like with so many different things, just keeping that constantly refreshed. With the shows that I watch, with the popular music I listen to, or the instrumental music I listen to, like I like have playlists from like years, and I'm like, that's what I was really into in that year, But I just like it because it's like I can step into so many different pockets of what I do enjoy, and it's always changing. And we talk about this with repertoire all the time, like music that I loved when I first started my master's. Just like you said, like now I'm like, I get why someone would like that, but right now it's not speaking to me. It's just a weird thing. Like I never really.
People change their perspectives, and just to go back to the Marcel Mule Rosher thing, I had a really talented student who's teaching up at SUNY Fredonia, Nick Childs. And so it was him and another student named Gallo Morales, who is now in New York. And those guys, were all in on the Rosher thing, and they played great. And I was like, I'm not going to say you should do something different. I was asking for musical things, and that was basically it from them. But Nick, was very open, to that concept. And we talked about it numerous times. He kind of wrote about it in his thesis a little bit of, a lot has been made of this difference in pedagogies. But when you go back and actually look at it and listen to those guys play, they really weren't that far apart, It just later years it got dogmatic and stupidly so. I would say I think there's a lot more that we have in common than.
In interest of talking about things that have changed over time with perspective, what are some early stances or ways that you taught at the beginning of your career that have evolved and changed as you get more years under your belt?
Ooh, boy. I'm not sure I've changed that much. I've tried to become more disciplined in creating structure for students. That's where I wish I would have done maybe some music education in my degree path. I was all performance all the way, and I kind of wish I had some of that background that music education students have in terms of learning types and all that stuff. And also it comes from the fact that Dr. Hemke, hardly ever talked about anything technical or about how to play the instrument so much as he only talked about music, from my recollection at least. And so I felt like it was a very intuitive and there's just the magical thing that happened most of the time, And so that's something that I just identify with. That's what moves me more. And I will talk about fingerings or, voicing this, that, whatever. But I think that sometimes I could have done earlier in my career, provide more structure for students in terms of really laying out this. Make sure you do the, just a little bit more detail in terms of what I was assigning them every week. At the same time, students have to know that, they have to find that intrinsic motivation, and actually listen to what the teacher is saying, write it down.
Yeah.
You have to take that ownership yourself. So, if you're providing that for a student full stop, what's going to happen when then it's not there anymore? They might fall apart.
It's true.
So
it's true.
So I've tried to get better at that with the recognition that, my strong suit is still my strong suit, and, still to lean into that.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned, you have different approaches to handling different types of students. And I like hearing you say that, and then I was able to kind of see that in real time too, just because my experience playing the Maslanka piece with Matt, and then we did the chamber piece, the Viet Quang piece. I think that was AJ's recital, and then my experience just kind of seeing you. It wasn't much because we were just kind of sound checking the pieces and then playing on the Saxort concert.
Right.
But I got to kind of sit back and kind of watch you teach, and each time it was so different. But it was
that's good to know.
It was still it was, and maybe it's just because you've been doing it for so long. It's just kind of it's a part natural. Of it. It's natural. But it was huge for me just to kind of see, because it's just the way that you were engaging and what the things that you were saying, especially between the duet that we had and then the Viet Quang piece. It was two completely different situations, and you coached us different ways. And I found that kind of intriguing, and both were really effective. And I walked away from that going man, I feel like I got better in the same way for each one. And it was two different interactions. And even we talked about this last episode. You'll get to see it when it comes out. But I was talking about watching you teach during Sax Orc, and like you were kind of just like sitting in the back, and I think I referred to you as like Yoda, to where you were just like listening in the back, and then you'd come up and like drop one piece of knowledge, and everybody was just like, yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool to see, because I've seen that, and then you've been like, hands on, and then you've kind of especially with us, you kind of let us work some things real quick, and then gave us 2 or 3 things that like changed our approach.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to see that versatility.
I can't tell you how gratified it is to hear that, because we don't often get that from you guys. Not that you're withholding anything, of course, but just really gratifying to hear that. So thank you for telling me that. It's just it's great to work with great students. So yeah,
like him.
It was enjoyable for me.
He's a great.
Nah, my professor makes me great.
No.
Dr.
It's a team
Deibel,
effort.
What is it like teaching or having taught different generations of students? Do you feel like naturally, there's something that we talk about a lot. It's like the attention span of today's student, because of social media and like phones and things. But like, are there any specific things that you've noticed with the breadth of career you've had already?
Geez, I saw this on the list and I was like, I don't know. I don't know how I would answer. I mean, I don't think that, students are changing in some ways. I feel more urgency in some ways to make sure that my students are thinking about what mark will they leave on the world, and this actually kind of goes back to my initial qualms about even going into academia or teaching, because I felt like, what are we doing, playing Creston Sonata like for my entire life, teaching, like what's the point? And then I thought, okay, well, I'm teaching a lot of music education majors. Those guys are going to go out and teach a lot of students, so I will have some influence. I'll be able to reach people in a certain way, but just I guess in terms of like what's going on in the world around us right now, like this is where another thing that kind of made me kind of hesitate in terms of like thinking about music as a career is I'm not going out there and really making a difference. I'm not on the ground being an activist in the way that I dream about, you know what I'm saying? So but that's also a tricky line to walk as a teacher.
Sure.
Because your first job is to teach them how to play the instrument. But I don't know if it was might have been Stravinsky. Somebody said like all good art should be political. If it's not, then it's not really worth much. I don't know. I think I believe that, but it's a really tricky line to walk as a teacher. But I guess just in terms of the day-to-day stuff, I'm trying to get better at learning different learning styles and being a little bit more receptive and picking up on that a little bit quicker, to make sure that I can provide the right kind of instruction and motivation. And I guess the generations of students are changing in terms of that. Yeah, the attention span. Mm-hmm. I don't know though. I mean, I might feel things are going one way, and then you get like a class like we've had the last couple of years. Like next year's class is going to be amazing. Those kids can all play, and are highly motivated as far as I can tell. And maybe it's not so much changing as I think it is, but
I think I always feel that way because people talk about Gen Z like awfully, but I mean like
we also do occasionally.
Yeah, well, about Gen Z, we are Gen Z.
Yeah, but
like other generations.
Like
Oh yeah, I don't even know. I mean, I think we do it in response just because we're salty. But I think like to a certain extent, like a lot of the stuff that I feel like a freshman would walk into our studio is systematic. Mm-hmm. Like there's so many little things here and there where we're like, no, this is what you do for this is what you do for that. So it's kind of like coaching in that structure that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. Like the expectation is for you to be at this standard by the end of this semester. So so I feel like from day one there is at least a very clear explanation of what you are to do.
Right.
And I think like that has a pretty big effect on how someone lives day to day.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even the undergrads are growing to be very, very disciplined and very like young. With that, I mean, that took a while for me, but I think I didn't have a studio culture like that, you know, and I think that's something that you obviously brought here, you know, when you got this job. And so like, so I said that to like to challenge what you said a little bit, but also to kind of ask like, you know, because we're going to be on the front line soon. Where do you start with building a culture like that? Like, you know, because you have all these values and it's like, okay, well, I have to get to the letter A first.
Yeah.
You know,
I think as you were talking, I kind of was thinking that it's a blend between what you're talking about, you know, the spelling out of like measurable, actionable items that can be, you know, assessed or whatever, but also making sure that the kids are feeling something, like, you know, that it's meaningful to them. You know, like you can't, you know, you go through a math class, you learn how to do this and that. Okay, great. Like, I'm not sure that creates a whole lot of meaning for your life. Maybe it does. I don't know. But that's something special about music. And I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the, you know, XYZ of everything. It's just like, you know, what does this actually mean? Like, why are we doing this? Like, do we feel a true meaning behind it? So I think it's like making sure that everybody is buying into it, you know, is one of the big things. It was when we started this sports psychology program that we do that I actually developed a lot of this, you know, because I got here was after, you know, the longtime professor had retired, and he had a great studio, a great culture. Then there was an interim that was a little bit, you know, bit of a transition period. Then I came in, and so it was kind of still in that transition period, you know, when I arrived. And so you had all different kinds of students that were all kind of into different things. And I'm not saying everybody has to be doing the same things exactly. I think we should have a great variety of people that are interested in different things and, you know, different approaches. But my thing was more that, you know, we were acting as more of a unit and supporting one another, and that there was no clickiness or, you know, talking badly about anybody. You know, I just didn't want anything like that, because that does not belong inside music, you know, for me at least. So, it was the first person that we had, who was Frances, at the time Frances Cacho, now Frances Dallas, and she's now working for the military doing sports psychology stuff for them out in Oklahoma, I think, or Texas maybe now. And, you know, she helped me develop, you know, what I wanted to see as a studio culture. And I had all the musical things, but it was more about that other stuff that I was talking about earlier that I felt like I wanted to get better at, and making sure it was bought into the same thing. So the way that she helped me with that is she kind of got me to realize how is that culture instilled, no matter if it's in music or something else. And I think a lot of it is you just, you know, you give people agency. You make sure that they feel like they have a voice, you know, and that's what I really try to do with you grad students, is make sure that this feels like a team effort, that we all have a say, that we all get to discuss different approaches and what's working, what's not, how to, you know, tackle problems when they arise. And then, you know, the approach of brutal honesty followed by total unmitigated support, you know, making sure that you kill them with kindness after you've given them the brutal truth about whatever it is, you know? And I think most students, if they're, you know, want to be at a high level, they want that, you know, and that motivates them. So, and the togetherness, you said something maybe in a previous podcast, but just that sense of all sharing in this thing that we're trying to achieve together, you know, that was the thing. And it really worked. And, you know, there's been some things, you know, that have come up along the way, but, you know, I think baseline, I feel like most of the studio is really going in the right direction and together, you know, and they've bought into it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a mouthful, but it all seems like it seems like it's a lot. And that's because it is, but there's a lot of intention that goes behind that. But I mean, like, I think about that all the time. Like, I had the benefit of walking into a situation, like walking into being here and being like, okay, there's already a lot of great stuff already happening. I feel like I could just like maybe add this. I'm good. But then it's a different thing when you're walking into something and like it's a blank canvas.
Oh yeah.
You know, and it's like, holy crap. Like,
this is something I think about too, because it seems like a blank canvas, but there's already an understood culture when you walk into something new. And I see this a lot with like marching band programs or band programs in general when they get a new director. Change happening gradually instead of just coming in and saying, all right, we're doing this now. If you don't like this, get out type of thing. If you step into a new situation, it's a blank canvas for you maybe, because now you're having to draw up what you want it to look like. But I mean, maybe what are your thoughts on stepping into a situation when there is buy-in? If you like step into a situation where, you know, there may be some, I guess, upperclassmen / students that have been there for a while that may push back a little bit. Have you experienced that? And if so, like, how would you handle a mix of people buying in and then people not quite being on track?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Yeah, I think, you know, you got to be able to meet the students where they're at in some sense, and you want to be. I think you need to be interested in getting to know the students. You know, I think that's where sometimes people want to keep a little bit too much distance. You know, and if you can let them know that you care, then they're really going to be, you know, willing to do mostly what you want, I think. And then at the same time, you got to be willing to call out attitude if there's something going on that needs to be called out, you know, because sometimes people think they can get away with this or that. And if you let it be known that I recognize what you're throwing my way and that's not acceptable, you know, I mean, but you were right in what you were saying earlier in terms of it's not ever necessarily it might be blank canvas for you, but there's, you know, a situation that might have existed before, you know, so you want to go in with your eyes open. So I was, you know, tried to do that, sort of figured out, you know, what had been done in the past. You know, you can do that by talking to your colleagues that are, you know, in the winds percussion department with you. Sometimes you have access to the previous teacher and you can, you know, talk to them a little bit. Yeah. So you're just trying to find out as much about, you know, the history of what's going on before. But you can absolutely take a program that may be like really underachieving and you find a way to inject that energy and inspiration, and you'd be amazed at what you can make happen.
That's
I think.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and watch this and with a notepad.
Taking
notes.
Well, you guys' personality. I mean, that's one of your biggest assets. I've told Matt this before, you know, but you know your personality and I don't know, that's a huge asset. I can't understate that enough, you know, and so if you use that to your advantage, you know, you can get students to do a lot, you know, just by letting them know you care, being there for them, and then, you know, taking ownership of what you do really well. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
I mean, I literally, Dr. Deibel doesn't know this, but after our lessons, I just go and I talk into my phone on voice memos for like 10 minutes, and I'm like, Dr. Deibel said this, you know, because it's good stuff, man. And I think about interactions I've had with all of my mentors, and I don't have enough of that. And I'm like, no, I'm going to get this right with Dr. Deibel, you know, because
it's really important.
Yeah.
You know, like I've started to do this a little bit more recent, like in the last 5 years or so, where like I'll be, you know, like about to sleep. This inevitably happens. I'll be, you know, going to sleep, you know, and then I'll think of something and like, oh, damn, that's a good idea. And so I've gotten more used to just like, all right. And I go and pick up my phone and like make a little note or whatever. Yeah. Because if you don't remember it,
oh, it hurts.
Yeah, it hurts bad.
Yeah. I mean, for the whole first year, I think like I'm the type of student I ask an incessant amount of questions, and so Dr. Deibel can tell you that. Like, I would like, if something I thought of during the week, I would just like write it in my notes, and I would get to my lesson with Dr. Deibel, and I'd be like, he doesn't even know what I have for him today. Like,
I love it. I love it.
But it's like, you know. It's just this is the last step, you know.
Yeah.
And so
you want to get it right.
Got to get it right.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that.
But you know, you can continue that, you know, once you graduate. And it's something that, you know, Joe Luloff, for example, has always been one of the best things about studying with him is that he's always there later on if you need him. And that's one of the things that we had in H2 as well, is that we always call each other, you know, for, you know, I got this issue. What do you think I should do? Yeah. That mentorship is something that I think people, they get out of school and they just think, okay, well, that's done now. No, it doesn't have to be.
And that's honestly one of the most valuable parts about this experience. You know, just having that person to just help you get out of your own head sometimes. You know, or even just like make you think about something from an entirely new viewpoint. I feel like I you know, like you talk about what Dr. Park says, like the eagle vision.
Yeah.
Every time I'm in something with Dr. Deibel, I'm asking about that, or we're talking repertoire, you know, I'm playing, or life. I feel like I'm always encouraged to zoom out a little bit more, and it just helps me because you know, you get so focused on the nitty gritty, and like you're just stuck. You can't get out.
Yeah, and then eventually, what you do also is you'll you'll go at some point. You'll say, "Oh, well, what would Dr. Deibel do about this?" Or you know, "What would Dr. Parks do about this?" And then you'll think, "Wait a minute, do I really need to ask him about that? What would I do?"
Yeah.
You know. And so I've gotten more as the years have gone by. I've gotten more, you know, confident about doing that. Where I thought, I really need to call blah 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 about this, and I'll be like, "Do I though?" You know, I know what to do. You know.
I think it's like when you coach us through a few of those situations, like it certainly helped me. I'm like, well, I kind of know. Like I think when I was fresher, a little more nervous and a little more antsy, like I probably would have like terrorized you with every little thing. But now I'm like, no, like I think he's equipped me with enough to be able to handle this at least relatively well. Yeah. And I mean, just like you said, sometimes, you know, we'll run into things and I'll ask Micah or AJ, I'll be like, how did I deal with that? They'll be like, no, I thought you dealt with that well. And I was like, you know, but I mean, it's all a part of that. That all of this is just a big process.
Oh yeah.
You know, and
Yeah, I think it was Gary Smullian. Van Dorn just put up a thing that Gary Smullian. If you guys don't know Gary Smullian, famous jazz baritone saxophonist, incredible player, plays in Vanguard, I think, right? Vanguard Orchestra.
Yes.
And he just talks about how like people are just so obsessed with the outcome. You know, it's the process. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That's where you grow.
It is. It is. We always tell people you got to fall in love with the process.
Ooh, is that the studio motto? Fall in love with the process.
It can be one of them.
It can be.
Yeah.
I heard like 17 mottos.
No, our studio motto is controversial, man. You're a member of the saxophone studio now.
I'm not in touch with. I'm a casual, I guess.
Oh man, a few things that we've already talked about, but one thing I really want to ask Dr. Deibel is there anything that excites you or concerns you about the future of classical and contemporary music?
Oh man, yeah, everything. Sorry, I just thought about concerning.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, it's the same as it's been, I feel like, since I developed the consciousness that I have surrounding the music, you know, which is that, you know, it's hard to make a career. Support for the arts is getting ever smaller. You know, we're looking at the NEA getting completely axed at the moment. So that's really worrying. And this attitude that, you know, you go to the cast, you know, go check out at the Publix or whatever, or some store. Would you like to make a $5 donation to blah, blah, blah? It's like, you know what? Maybe you, the big company, should be making the, you know, donation rather than I'm just buying something from you and you want me to give money. You know?
Right.
So this idea of philanthropy has been sort of completely turned on its head, like in the opposite direction that it should be, in my view. Because we've gotten into this transactional thing in this world where everything is a transaction.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't put a price on how, you know, whatever piece you're obsessed with at the moment. You can't put a price on how that makes you feel.
Right.
You know, going to that amazing concert, being in the audience for that concert, you know, or being a performer for this amazing, you know, you guys did that PASIC show or whatever. Like, can you put a price on that? No,
absolutely.
You can't. And most people that are not musicians or not in the arts cannot think of it like that. You know, and so that's really worrying. Because, you know, we do have to have, in the current system that we have to have money to make things happen, right? But yet it seems to be that the resources are dwindling. So that's really worrying. But at the same time, you have, you know, even more people that are doing this because they really love it, you know. And I think that, you know, it'll continue to exist. I guess specific things that I'm excited about, I mean, I don't know if I can say anything specific. I think it's seeing the next generation, you know, people like you guys, you know, doing this podcast, keeping this conversation going, in a way that's going to be really influential for the younger kids that are, you know, studying with you, you know, at the moment and in the future. So
That's good.
yeah.
I think, you know, you touched on just like the practicality of a career in performance. And I remember when I was younger, in high school, thinking about what I wanted to do, I couldn't imagine a life without music. And I had like just discovered tableau at like the ripe age of 16, and I was like, "This is the best thing ever," you know. And I knew I liked teaching, but I really liked playing the saxophone. And so, like, I think the scariest thing as we think about today is like what a career in performance actually ends up looking like, and you know, already it was dwindling, and we're having to endure so many more circumstances where it seems like it's just getting axed more and more and more. Do you think there of course is a sort of future for a performance-based career, but how do you think that's going to change?
Kind of goes back to actually something that does excite me, which is specifically about the saxophone, is that you see more soloists and more chamber groups out there really in the limelight in a way you never have before. So, you know, Tim McAllister, Stephen Banks, you know, some of the chamber groups, Prism has been really active. Noise is, I think, making a good noise. And so, like, that's really exciting. But I know that I would not probably, maybe, you know, I would be forced into trying something different, but it would be really much more difficult for me to have the life that I have if I wasn't teaching. There's just no doubt about it, you know. But at the same time, you know, you can develop a different sort of looking career. You know, it doesn't have to be, one of the things I try to stress from a young age with these students is, like, you know, it's not just band director or saxophone professor. Like, you know, a lot of them will be band directors, but that's, you know, and that's great. But if they're trying to do something other than the band director thing, you know, I always use Aaron Rodgers as the prime example of this. Aaron is a teacher, saxophonist, composer up in New York, and she doesn't even have her doctorate, by the way. She went up there after her master's, I don't believe at least. She went up there after her master's, and she got a job at a publishing company, Pure Music International, which is a huge publishing company. She worked this, you know, desk job basically for, I don't know how long, but it was, I would think it's at least 5 years, while she kind of got into the scene in New York, and she was going around and meeting lots of people, continuing to develop her compositional voice. She had all these little side projects developed, and then she got to the sort of critical mass of, like, people wanting to have her write music, or her getting hired to play gigs, and now she's a member of ICE. She's teaching at Manhattan School of Music. She's got, you know, New Thread Quartet, all these other groups that are going in New York, you know. And I know people, one of my collaborators right now, Ari Streisfeld, was in Jack Quartet, and he left Jack Quartet because, you know, to live in New York and to just be a performer is really hard.
It is,
you know, it's really, really hard. But, you know, there are plenty of people that have this sort of like way of hybridizing their career where they might, you know, maybe do some professional photography, but yet they're still playing regular gigs. Michael Lowenstern, you know, is a coder. As far as I know, he does like not IT, but coding for various companies, and yet he still plays all the time and has you know, educational YouTube channel, all that stuff. So I think it's about developing a diversity of abilities that you have, and at least something that will enable you to pay the bills, and you can still have, you know, what you can call a performing career. I think for the people that only perform, there's just very few of them. You know.
It's hard. I mean, but one thing that you talked about, even before you got to the stature of the teaching career that you have now, is when you were younger, you were willing to do the thing where you were just spending an hour a day on the computer, cold calling, putting yourself out there. And I think, like, that's a really tangible way that you can just, like, get your hands on the reins and just, like, steer the ship, you know, and just, you never know, you know. And so
Yeah,
That's going to be, I'm going to steal that. And I'm going to try to do like 30, 45 minutes a day of just like putting myself out there somewhere. Because you really never know what's going to be the thing. And you tell us that all the time.
Yeah. And you got to just cast lots of lines, knock on lots of doors. Some will open, some won't.
Yeah.
But then, the things lead to other things.
Yeah.
You just never know, how that's going to go. It's happened to me so many times. Like H2, for example, went to this Chamber Music Institute, which in and of itself was not super impactful for us, but we happened to meet Takuma Ito at that thing. And he wasn't even writing for us. He was like writing for some other group, but he liked our playing and he's like, hey, I want to write a piece for you guys. We're like, cool, let's do it. Yeah. That became Echolocation.
Yeah.
And so it's just, and then that led to, other things.
Yeah.
You just never know. So I always have to remind myself of this too, because, we get, into the day-to-day of teaching, which takes so much energy. And then, you forget, you like ignore your email and, don't get back to that person. But the more, signals you send out, flares you send out, usually the more things happen.
Yeah.
And I just, you kind of constantly have to remind yourself of that because it's just so easy to kind of get bogged down in the day-to-day of stuff.
I'm terrible. I'm probably, I know I'm young right now, but I'm terrible at that. We were talking about this the other day. Like, I was going through a situation where I'm like, I play a lot here, and I'm like, man, there's opportunities, kind of in this like tri-state area as well as on the coast to go play, and I'm like, man, like I feel like I'm not gigging as much outside, and he was telling me like, you just gotta have you tried cold calling? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Like I want to play and get my name out there that way. And then, he helped me kind of just realize like there's nothing wrong with just putting yourself out there in that way. And I struggle with like not trying to come across as being like arrogant or like, and there's definitely a way to do it, but I strayed away from that. But just hearing you say that like motivates me there's nothing wrong with calling either local orchestras and just saying like, hey, is there any opportunity to come play? Can I get on a sub list? Just different things like that. And that's just awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I followed my teacher's footsteps. I played in New World, and like low key, I found it because like some random like Instagram page that I follow just said, oh, New World is taking applications for a sub list. You just toss in a recording, and saxophone included. I was like, all right, cool. Just dropped it in there, and then I got a call in the summer. I was like, wow, I didn't actually even expect anything to come of that. You never know, man.
That's right.
That's the scary thing. But I mean, it's a good thing too. I think like it's for some people. I don't even know if this is a word, but for some people, it's a little too much like happenstantial. Like it's too random. But I think, like, just like you said, finding the thing that's going to sustain you, and then at the same time, you're casting those lines. It's like the ideal point to operate at.
Yeah.
Nice. I have one selfish question, and then after this, we can, like, whatever you want to do. Obviously, I've like, and of course in percussion, like, I want to play as much as possible, and I want to research as much as possible, and watch people that are doing it at the highest level. And you have an opportunity to consistently play with probably my favorite, one of the best in the world right now, marimbist of all time, GA.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to be selfish for a second and just kind of ask you about that process.
Oh, yeah.
What's that like? Just maybe some, like a story or an experience that you've had that kind of, that puts it all together?
Well, I mean, that's just, again, dumb luck, in many ways. Like, Jeff Leffert in our quartet was colleagues with Michael Kirkendall, who was the founder of Cortona Sessions. And then he brought on Jihei at some point after we had started doing that. And then just by, virtue of the fact that the rest of the, first of all, can you pay to bring a saxophone quartet out every year? No. They had kids, and then now administrative jobs, so it's hard for them to get away. So I kind of became the default Cortona person. And then Jihei, was there. Jihei is just an amazing human being and like so much fun to hang out with. And so that's what started up between me and Michael and Jihei. We started this piano percussion saxophone trio, which I had thought of because of knowing Marcus Weiss, who teaches over in Switzerland, and he has this group called Trio a Canto, and they've commissioned like all the top European composers, but no one's playing the music because no one has that type of ensemble. So I was like, well, we can start that here in the States, and then we'll like commission our own pieces and play some of that stuff too.
Nice.
And so, but we all vibed like as just like people that like to hang out and, you know, get wild and, you know, have fun times, right? So that just really worked on a personal level. And I think that's maybe just one thing to say is like, if you enjoy hanging out with somebody, then, you know, that's a really good opportunity.
Oh, he's talking about us.
Then you get, then that's a great opportunity to like, hey, like this is something special that, you know, we both like doing, like, why not make something out of it, you know? But then with Jihei, going past that, you know, Michael's not playing as much anymore and not teaching anymore. So he's now a sommelier and running a restaurant in Lawrence, Kansas. So,
That's awesome.
so just again, outside interest, like you never know where it might go. Then Jihei and I started, you know, doing more duo stuff once he kind of like stopped doing as much. And I'm just sitting over here like, man, this is just little old me, you know, playing with Jihei. You know, I know what you're saying. She's an incredible, like hearing her play Bach on marimba. I'm just like, you know, so, and then, you know, we just make suggestions and, you know, then this happens. And then I end up going to Korea and playing in the National Concert Hall with her on her recital, you know, and it's just, it's kind of amazing. Yeah. But I don't know why she likes playing with me, but it's a, you know, makes me feel good, I guess. I don't know, but it's a privilege, you know, it's a privilege to play with other great musicians. So, you know, you just try to seek out whatever opportunities you can and hopefully something comes of it. So
Nice.
yeah.
I had to be selfish for a minute.
No, it's
I will have it be on record that when we played the Ms. Lanka, Dr. Deibel did say I was a good marimba player.
He did.
And considering what I'm compared to, I left the hall and I was like, Matt, did you hear what he said?
I was there. This is true. It's true.
No, that's awesome to hear. That's great.
Doc, I got to squeeze one more question in before we get to our viewer question. You talked a little bit about your teachers. Can you tell us who your most influential mentors were and how they affected your teaching?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, well, certainly my parents like were super influential on me. Like just, I fought them for a long time, but super influential for me as human beings and also music. They were both musicians. And then my middle school band director, he'll probably never see this, but John Walker, wherever you might be in this world, impossible name to look up on Facebook. I've tried, believe me, but he was a real important influence on me. And then my high school teacher, Reginald Jackson, who's just getting close to retirement, I think. But he's the one that taught me like kind of the most early important lessons, like be a great musician first, be a saxophonist second. You know, he would play all these other musicians for me. We would stop our lesson. He would go down into the basement where his, you know, record player was, and he would, you know, put on some Pavarotti or something like that, you know. So he kind of got that in my head. But really, that was where I grew up, I guess, as a saxophonist in the early stages. Fred Hemke, I mean, so much worldliness and experience, and you know, just reading his autobiography, I was amazed. Some of the stuff I didn't know about, and then I was also reminded about a lot of things that I learned from him. Joe Luloff, such an important mentor and professional mentor for me, and another great human being. That's just been one of the most fortunate things is great musicians, but also amazing humans, and just getting to be around them. I was in Kansas City once visiting with this bass player, Jeff Harshbarger, over the summer, and I happened to be up there for a gig, and he's in Kansas City. So we want to have a drink sometime, and so we got together, And we talked about summer plans. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm going over to, France. I'm going to record an album and I'm going to take some lessons from my teacher. This guy's like the first call bass player in Kansas City. Like, this is when I was just first at Wichita State. I was like, oh, you're taking lessons from teacher? Like, okay.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I mean, he drinks better wine than I do. He makes better coffee than I do. I just want to be around him. And I was like, huh. And so that was something I learned in Wichita, was just interfacing with the jazz community. That's much more common in the jazz community than it is in the classical community.
Yeah.
And so I told myself, why can't I do that, Yeah. So then when I was in Strasbourg for the World Congress, I saw Marcus Weiss again after a couple of years. I'd worked with him at Darmstadt. And I said, hey, are you busy? Like, I want to play this piece for you. Just get your thoughts, He's like, nah, I got to go back to Basel because I got to prepare for this concert next week in Portugal. But my house is only an hour away. If you want to come on the train on Tuesday, come play for me at my house. So I just left the Congress for a day and I went to Basel, played for him. He gave me some really great insights on the piece I was working on. And then we drank wine in his backyard for the rest of the day. So,
perfect.
Mentors.
Yeah.
That's nice.
People you want to hang out with, I think.
So a couple things. Like we said before, this is kind of new tradition. We're kind of starting here on the podcast, and you get to be the first guest that gets to kind of start the next part of it. But we had a question on, I think this was a YouTube question.
Kaylin
McGarry put a question on there that we want to get your take on, and I think she asked, after preparing a piece that you don't resonate with, how do you gain a sense of enthusiasm about it? Or is it even necessary to be enthusiastic about it?
A compulsory piece? Something they have to play?
I guess for the sake of
so.
this scenario, probably something that you have to play or you're getting paid to play.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I try to see if there's anything in the music that I can latch onto. If there's not, which I definitely played lots of music that doesn't have that speaks to me, if there's not, then I will just... it's my opportunity to at least show my quality as a player, and play the best that I can, and just make something sound good. I hate to say it as simply as that, but I think that's basically what it comes down to for me.
That's good.
It's kind of a short answer, but
we talked about that a little bit a couple of episodes ago.
I remember that.
I don't know I forgot what we came up with, but.
Well, it's a matter of professionalism, is what you guys were saying. I think
sometimes it doesn't even matter.
Yeah,
I don't always think it's necessary to be enthusiastic. It's just a task.
Yeah.
Well, your enthusiasm can permeate it. Does the piece give anything back to you? Is more the question. I would say that's where sometimes I get left a little cold. Yeah. If I'm not excited about something, then I don't get anything back from it. But I can still give myself fully to it.
Yeah, which sometimes I think can change your enthusiasm about the piece, with the way that we make it individual and infuse ourselves into it. It kind of can take another identity.
Definitely, yeah. There's some pieces like, crossover pieces sometimes when you get a piece that is jazz influenced or something like that, maybe it's been misunderstood by a lot of other performers, and you can use your experience to say, oh, they just didn't pick up on this that's in the piece. Maybe it's something I can bring out a little bit more, but yeah.
That's a good question and a good answer.
So,
oh man,
for our listeners, this is another
we could give you
another part of the
think about this.
Another part of the gig that comes with being a guest. The new tradition, or the second part of it, is our guest has to leave a question for our following guest.
Oh, jeez.
And it could be anybody.
If I only knew who the next guest was.
I think the fun part is that we don't know.
We don't even know who the next guest.
Or maybe we know and we're not quite.
You're just not telling you. Oh man, I don't. You guys ask really good questions. I don't know what's left. If you weren't playing music, what would you be doing with your life?
That's a good one. Well, Dr. Deibel, thanks for being our first guest.
Yeah. Hey, it's an honor.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for asking me.
Yeah. This is going to be a great watch. I'm not going to lie.
Yes.
This is going to be a staple. It's going to be a staple.
I hope so.
But that's it for this episode, you guys. Thank you again for tuning into the podcast where we keep our finger on the pulse of what matters most. 2 voices, 1 vibe, and a whole lot to share with the world. Thank you, guys.